Good job, Jimmy.
Good job.
I pulled something.
All right, we come to the second part of our the second act after the brief intermission, the brief pyrotechnic intermission. And Dr. Jones is more than willing to take some questions and get into conversation and that kind of thing. So if you have any questions, just let it fly.
Dr. Jones, I have a partner who listens to the hardest acid rock you can imagine, from groups such as Putrid, Corpse, Gangrene. These are some of the names of these groups. They're overtly satanic. Where is the origin of that? Where does that fit into this picture that you're describing?
I think it's the same trajectory that I described with sexual liberation. Remember horror movies? These are kind of manifestations of the horror. So I mean, there's a kind of musical progression that led down to these things. I didn't follow this stuff, but there was clearly Black Sabbath and those groups were clearly doing things that were considered demonic. But the impetus, I think, was horror. I think that's what we're talking about here. It's the epigraph to Monsters from the Inn. I think this nails it right here. It's St. James. Everyone who is tempted is attracted and seduced by his own wrong desire. Then the desire conceives and gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it too has a child, and the child is death. That's what we're talking about. If you read the Marquis de Sade, that's exactly what's going on with the Marquis de Sade. If you read, we only have a limited number of options here, and this guy nailed it right here. This progression from desire to sin to death. And so the three chapters of this, the three parts of this book are desire, sin, and death. And by the time you reach the level of transgression that we reached by the end of the 70s, it's death. That's the essence of what horror is. I told in talks I've given, I said that Alien is the sequel to Deep Throat. The problem is sex isn't fun anymore. It's horrifying. It'll kill you. Kill you means death. I think that's the trajectory we're talking about. Just carried out in more and more detail. Yes, sir.
Well, okay, we talked on the negative a little bit, but you touched on Irish folk music. Is there an answer that culture can give to what the American experience is?
Mm-hmm. Did you say, is there an answer to?
Yes.
The answer is folk music. Yes, the answer is folk music. I'll give you the change that took place in my life is my mother-in-law moved out of her house, and we went down the basement and we discovered musical instruments. I had known this family for 50 years. They'd never played any musical instruments. They'd lain there for 50 years. Why is that? The short answer to that question is radio. Because nobody, if you want to intimidate a musician, turn on the radio, and the musician just will wither and die. You don't want to compete with that kind of stuff. And that happened with the music. And so as a result, people stopped making their own music, and they started listening to other people. And that became a form of control from the beginning. As soon as music was reproduced electronically, it became a form of control, and I'm talking about Muzak. The Muzak Corporation was founded in the 1920s, and that was called musical engineering. So that's what it became. As soon as you have that type of otherness to the music, it is a form of control. All sexual liberation is a form of control, and so what we need to do is to break out of that, and the only way you do it is by making your own music. Now, as you notice, when you make your own music, you make mistakes that you don't hear on those recordings because the recordings are perfect. You know what I mean? But what you do have is an immediacy that you don't have with the other thing. And the other thing that you don't have is you can now take these music and bend it to your experiences. Okay? Now, I have to confess to you, I have a problem sometimes not playing Irish tunes, but singing Irish songs. Because, in a sense, I'm not Irish. I'm half Irish. I'm like Barry. Do you remember Barry Goldwater? Barry Goldwater ran for president. His father was Jewish, so Barry Goldwater used to say, I'm half Jewish, and so I can only play 9 holes on restricted golf courses. My experience, as I tried to explain to you, was that C, F minor, F, G progression. That's the kind of musical world that I grew up in. I had different experiences. And so when I never stole Trevelyan's corn. Okay? That's in the fields of Athenry. So you stole Trevelyan's corn, so the young might see the morn. Now the prison ship lies waiting in the bay. That's about Australia. I have a friend a friend of my son went to Australia, and he got to the customs, and the customs official said, do you have a criminal record? And my son's friend said, no, is it still a requirement to get in here?
That was smart.
He was deported immediately.
Yeah. No, you're not coming in.
So anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is, so I'm in this experience, I'm in the middle of the rebirth of Irish music in South Bend, Indiana, and suddenly I'm trying to bring this together with my experiences. Now, I'm not starving to death, it's not the potato famine, but it is George Bush, or it's Irving Kristol. Oh, my name is Irving Kristol, and my son, his name is Bill. In my youth I followed Trotsky, and in truth I follow him still. But to call yourself a Bolshevik would fill the world with dread. So please don't call me a commie, call me a neocon instead. Yes, we are the neoconservatives, we rule the world, says I. And that dumb goy we call Georgie Boy doesn't understand how or why. Oh, we're marching into Syria, the fun has just begun. Comrade Trotsky would be proud to be known as a neocon. To keep the goyim pacified, by watching their TV, we let them watch dumb Irishmen like Sean O'Hannity. Bill O'Reilly and Chris Matthews, they can lick our boots and sigh, but to run the New World Order, no dumb Irish need apply. David Frum can excommunicate the paleos from National Review. For to be a neoconservative means to be one of a chosen few. Oh, we're marching into Syria, the fun has just begun. Comrade Trotsky would be proud to be known as a neocon. Hammurabi's tablets got busted during the looting in Iraq. But we're marching into Syria behind George Bush's back. They've got weapons of mass destruction, and they got them from Saddam Hussein. They've got weapons of mass destruction, oh, repeat once more the refrain. They got weapons of mass destruction, oh, believe me, oh, believe. If you want to know just where they are, they're hidden in Tel Aviv. Oh, we're marching into Syria, the fun has just begun. Comrade Trotsky would be proud to be known as a neocon. Yes.
Well, I was just going to ask, so we talk about, where does American Bluegrass, is that
American bluegrass is Scotch-Irish music that got real souped up and became like virtuoso. So the guy, Bill Monroe, Bill Monroe would play the mandolin in a completely virtuoso fashion. I mean, much better than I can play it. And that became, it's just a development of Scotch-Irish music. So it became like a showcase. So it's like jazz, in other words. The mandolin will take its part, and he does his fancy stuff, and then the banjo does his part, and so on and so forth. So that's where it came from. Yes.
Yeah, you've spoken about the need to raise consciousness,
Right.
because that's really the beginning of anything beyond that. And
Right,
so
absolutely.
sometimes we sort of say, what do we do about it? Well, first and foremost, we have to have a consciousness
Absolutely.
that kind of leads
You're
us to the
absolutely right.
correct action.
That's right.
But sometimes there is a discussion that can come up about the differentiation between revolution and counter-revolution.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about
Yes.
that?
Actually, this is important because
Yeah.
when I go to Iran, I always get into a semantic argument because everything is revolution in Iran. Like, how are we going to preserve the revolution? Or the women, they get the chador, they have to wear the hijab, and the westernized women keep pushing the hijab back farther and farther on their head. So what is the revolutionary position for the hijab? You know what I mean? So what I try and say there is, this wasn't a revolution, it was a counter-revolution. Why was it a counter-revolution? Well, because they threw out the Shah. Who was the Shah? The Shah of Iran was an American puppet. What did the American puppet do? He introduced the American system, which is sexual liberation as a form of control. So what is the absolute definition of whether it's a revolution or a counter-revolution? It's the relationship to Logos. Logos is the true north. We are rational creatures. We have to follow Logos. And so if the people that you're talking to are trying to lead you to a position where you succumb to your own passions and blot out your own reason, that's a revolution, that's bad. If they're trying to move you back from that position, back to the position where you can conform your actions to practical reason, which is the logos of human behavior, that's a counter.
And counter-revolution is
Good.
good.
Revolution bad, counter-revolution good.
Now, counter-revolution in terms of methodology.
I've thought about this too. Okay. Now,
See where I'm going.
because I'm thinking about I'm thinking about my experience in Iran. And so the Iranians invite me, and we're talking, they're going to do a conference on the race issue in America, and they invite a bunch of black Muslims, and it's a disaster. These guys are total hacks, they're total ideologues, and they're total racist. They're
Americans?
Well, a lot of them were black Muslims, a lot of them from Louis Farrakhan's operation. And they're racist, and they don't like white people, okay? And it became completely apparent to me that this is what is going on. So I said, I was ready to talk. They wouldn't let me talk. And the guy, my Iranian buddy, is talking to me after dinner. He says, look, we were afraid that they would get violent. He says, these are violent people. He was an ambassador to a country in Africa, wouldn't let you talk. So I complained to my buddy Nader Talibzadeh. So instead of talking to the conference, he puts me on his TV show, and I'm talking to 11 million Iranians, and it's being translated into Farsi. And so what do I say? This is the moment that he doesn't want to hear. It's basically George Soros is behind Black Lives Matter. Everybody, this is what I'm talking about, the level of consciousness being raised. We all know that now. We all know that George Soros was funding Ferguson. This is the resurrection of the Black-Jewish alliance. For 70 years, the Jews tried to turn the Negroes into revolutionaries. It's in the Jewish revolutionary spirit. From the founding of the NAACP until 1967, they tried to turn them into revolutionaries, and then it blew up when Harold Cruz wrote The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. This is a resurrection of that. And so I said, well, what do we need to go back? Does the dog have to return to the vomit of Jewish revolution? The answer is no. We need a new paradigm. What's the new paradigm? And I said, it's the Magi. Why is it the Magi? Well, first of all, I said they were 3 Persians. Okay? They were wise men. They came from the East. How do we know that they were wise men? Because they studied the Logos in the heavens. They were astronomers. They understood that we live in a world that is created by God and has its own rational order. And it is our job, that's what they understood, it's our job to understand that order and conform our lives to that order. Number one. Number two, what did they do? When they discovered this order, what did they do?
Acted on it.
They acted on it, absolutely right. But first you have to know the order, you have to have the consciousness before you act. So it's not ready, fire, aim. And so what did they do? They saw the star, and they followed the star. And this is what I said to the Iranians. I said, we have a duty to be rational, because that's how God made us. I don't care whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Hindu, we are rational creatures. And the only reason I can stand here in front of 500 very passionate Iranians in the middle of the desert and have you not lynch me is because of Logos, because I can speak to you and you can understand what I'm saying. And you can understand that we have some type of commonality there, and it would not be a good idea to do that. So they followed the star. And then I said to the Iranians, do you have the courage to follow the star wherever it leads you? Because that's what we have to do. And that's what they did. And what happened when they followed the star? What did they find? They found the Logos incarnate. A manifestation, the most supreme manifestation of the Logos in human history, lying there in the form of an infant. That was the reward they got for acting on what they knew. And then the third reason. What did they do after that? They went home by another way. Because Herod wanted them to come and wanted to dragoon them into being part of his his slaughter of the innocents. And so they were wise enough to understand, this is what the politician wants, this is the political movement that they're dragging me into, and we're going home by another way. And that's what they did. And I said, that's the program. Now, what effect is that going to have? I have no idea. I have no idea whether the Iranians have ever heard anything like this. But I think this is, as I said, this is the moment in history. This is the moment that we are living in right now, where the consciousness level has reached this point across the world. And once the consciousness level reaches this point, we may have someone who can translate that into political action.
Are these individuals out in the world right now seeing the death and despair like someone like Nietzsche has formulated in his work? Is that going to bring them to a realization of the Logos and understand how much despair and death and destruction is going to, that their actions or their acceptance of this revolutionary spirit in music, is that going to happen, do you think, or are they too far?
By the grace of God, it will. I cannot plumb the individual consciousness of people. I have a Jewish lady wrote this in the letters column of Culture Wars magazine. The Jewish lady, I'm the anti-Semite. This lady became a Catholic because she read my writing. And she understood this guy is telling the truth about the Jews. This guy does not hate the Jews. He's telling the truth about the Jews. And she converted to Catholicism. And I can't tell you how it's going to happen, but it's like they say, it's like the leaven in the loaf. You don't know how it spreads. It's suddenly, you put a little bit here and suddenly the whole loaf is start. That's the way consciousness is. I just got a letter from a black guy who was the type of guy I just saw in Iran. Now he's coming back to his Catholic roots because he was raised a Catholic and abandoned that. Now he's coming back. All I can say is that Logos is the antithesis of chaos. And as soon as people get really sick of chaos, they'll be open to Logos. Yes,
I don't know.
yes, sir. This man.
Well, you had us on a trajectory there to Woodstock, and you were talking about the folk music being an element of communist subversion, a
Yes.
tool that they were trying to use.
Yes.
And then I was left with a question because we kind of reached that point. We never got to the Rolling Stones and the Boys, right? Until we went outside. And I'm wondering where they fit into your... Okay, you got one revolution over here.
Okay.
Is this a different
the
revolution?
The commies had their idea of a revolution.
Right.
Comrade Jerome had his idea of a resolution. Part of this is the destabilizing element of sexual revolution. which takes on a life of its own. And this is what happened to the Jews. Their children succumbed to the sexual revolution. And Woodstock was a Dionysian festival, a manifestation of that obliterated in many ways the Jewish family, that was in many ways the support of the Jewish people. 1 year after that, the Rolling Stones are being criticized for charging $5 a ticket to their concerts. Can you imagine $5 a ticket? How much are they charging now? In order to get back their credibility with my generation, they said we're going to have a free concert at Altamont in California. That's where that concert came. That's why that concert came about. It was the same wave of Dionysian revolution, the Dionysian festival sweeping there. And again, the same thing happens. You sort of evoke the spirit, and then suddenly the spirit takes on a life of its own. So you can watch this. It's called Gimme Shelter. Go on to YouTube and type in Gimme Shelter, and you can watch the concert. And there is the seminal moment, I thought, that Mick Jagger starts playing Sympathy for the Devil, and the crowd is getting wilder and wilder. And they're on a stage that's about as high as that table, and they're surrounded by Hell's Angels. And the crowd is getting crazier and crazier, and Mick Jagger gets scared, and he stops playing. And everybody calms down. As soon as he starts playing again, they get wild. Well, this is exactly what you wanted to do. This is what the purpose of the music, isn't it? And at one point, there is the great moment. Keith Richards makes the sign of the cross. You can imagine. You know he's scared. And then, of course, we have the moment, the Dionysian moment, where the man gets killed. The black guy gets killed. The Hell's Angels stab him, which is the culmination, as I said, it's the culmination of, desire, sin, death. It was the culmination of the Dionysian festival. So that's where it ended up. So when you unleash, what I'm saying is, if you're the revolutionary and you want to unleash these passions, you can't tell what's going to happen, because you think it's going to be like the light switch, when you turn the light on and off, and that's not the way it is. In covert warfare, we call it blowback.
Because in the end, they want to control the masses through the revolution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly right. It's the same thing with covert warfare and the Mujahideen and Osama bin Laden. You create this guy, these proxy warriors, and they become the Frankenstein monster. And then you think, well, I guess I got to kill him. That's exactly what did they call Ben Franklin? The modern Prometheus. What did this is an American myth. What did Ben Franklin do? Why is he the modern Prometheus? Well, he stole fire from the heavens. Remember, he flew the kite, the lightning hits the key on the kite, and then he can store that energy in a bottle. That is the idea of all of these political scientists. We're going to take this energy and we're going to turn it into a form of control, except that Frankenstein is the result. And that's the problem that we're facing. Yes, sir, in the back there.
I really enjoyed your book, your sort of philosophical description of the nature of the music of Wagner and Schoenberg, and talking about how the notes were desiring each other and one and kind of not desiring each other another. And if you applying that same sort of analysis to rock and roll music, how do you see rock and roll fitting into that? I mean, you talked a lot about tonality, and how do you see it fitting into the nature of the development of music? To someone who doesn't really know much about the nature of music, how would you describe the problems with rock and roll musically?
Okay, first of all, the crucial transition, there was a crucial transition, and it was captured by the quote from George Antile. George Antile said, if we had to listen to one more piece by Schoenberg, we all would have committed suicide. And so it was with great relief that we greeted the first jazz band when it arrived in Paris. So in other words, the impetus of Wagner's Tristan and Isolde just ran off into the sand of atonality and disappeared. And there was nothing left. And so at this point, we needed a different vehicle, and that vehicle was Negro jazz, Negro Jewish jazz, of the sort that was being promoted out of New York City. And so what you have now is a whole different approach to it. Instead of chromaticism and the Tristan chord, you have the rhythm, that kind of insistent rhythm that is basic. But in terms musically, it's not really that. It's folk music. It never stops being folk music. It's just that the presentation becomes, some parts get emphasized, other parts get de-emphasized, but you have the same simple chord progressions, you have the same type of expectation. The blues they set up what I, in a sense, today, you sort of saw it coming, right? And so when I add the words to it, so everybody laughs because you see it coming because of the chord progression, and that was deliberately thwarted in Tristan, which became a kind of coitus reservatus, you know what I mean, like this endless orgasm or the endless lead up to orgasm. And instead of that, you have this insistent overemphasis on certain aspects. So I think personally, it never stopped being folk music. To get back to Ray Vaughan Williams, it just became a kind of amplification and emphasis on it.
Can I make a quick comment on
Yeah.
that? It kind of rides with that. Is that a lot of discussion that takes place after reading your book has to do with, it seems to me, where you draw the line. Some on one side would say all rock music is demonic. That's kind of way on one side, and then on the other side, it's like, well, and most of it is okay. Some of the lyrics maybe, but and so where would you? Can you speak to, the vast, it's rather a general category, isn't it, about rock music?
You mean where to draw the line?
Yeah.
First of all, lines, it's like modesty. It's always culturally conditioned. So to give you the best example, Byron, who was no paragon of chastity, was scandalized by the waltz.
Right.
Absolutely scandalized by the waltz because you held the woman in your arms. Nobody had done that before.
Right.
To hold the woman in your arms, you know what I mean? It's kind of face to face. Before you dance, like this, you go like that, and then you go around like this. That's like what Irish dancing is. It's basically 18th century dancing, the Cayley dancing. So that was shocking, and we don't think it's shocking anymore. So there's a cultural element to it. It's like going to the beach. You know what I mean? I have this reader, Monk Seraphim in Norway. He's a monk. He lives in a hermitage in the middle of the forest in Norway. And he looks like a character out of Lord of the Rings. He greets me at the airport in Estonia, which is like the dark side of the moon. And like Aragorn is walking up to me, got a big belt around. And he says to me, "You're Dr. Jones, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "I've read everything you've ever written." He says, "You were like a father to me."
You embraced him then, right?
And then he said to me, "But why did you run that picture of your daughter-in-law in that immodest dress on the cover of your magazine?" I'm thinking, what's he talking about? It was her wedding dress, her wedding gown, and it was strapless. And I tried to say, look, I didn't have anything to say about that. But that was beside the point. I had nothing to say.
I don't know how to Photoshop.
I had nothing.
That was his perception.
No, but the point I'm trying to make is, I know I didn't have anything to say about it, but the point here is, I didn't notice anything was wrong.
So how much of that is frog in the pot? And
That is exactly what we're talking about, because I live in a culture, he lives in the woods in Norway,
Right.
and I live in a culture where you go into Chicago and there's a 10-story high picture of a woman in her underwear.
But there are objective norms for modesty, and there must be objective norms for music. I mean, what's
think
the
it
difference
changes
between
from
cultural,
place to
cultural
place.
context is one thing, but then there's frog in the pot. I mean,
Are there objective norms?
we're just desensitized in a certain way.
Well,
Certain
Let me put it this way. Every single culture wears some kind of clothing.
Some.
Now, if you go to the Yanomamo, in the Amazon rainforest, you have some type of clothing. Now, if women walk around with their breast exposed, we would think that's immodest. But obviously, that's not the culture there. But then on the other hand, these are cultures that may be so saturated with sexuality that they don't really understand it. So I met women.
Objectively from natural law.
I'm trying to come to some type of understanding here, because they are not Christian cultures.
No.
Okay, so I'm talking with these women from Nigeria, and I'm talking about ethnic clothing, and I said, I was thinking about the Maasai. I was thinking, because everybody in Kenya wears T-shirts, which is a disaster culturally and economically, which I can talk about another time. But so I said, what about ethnic clothing? And the woman said to me, well, I don't want to walk around with my breasts exposed. So there was something objective about that. You know, in other words, when you got to Africa, when Christianity, whatever it got to Africa, there was some type of consciousness being raised to the point where they could no longer walk around with their breast exposed. So that may be qualified as something objective, but it's complicated. And I'm saying that it's in a sense, it's part of God's mercy in a sense that we become jaded to this type of thing, because that means we're not going to be aroused by this type of stuff. So I'm in Tehran, and the reporter from the New York Times comes up to me, and he says to me, is this your first time in Iran? And I said, yes. And he says, what's your impression? And I said, desexualization. This is the desexualization of culture. And in a sense, that's why it's a counter-revolution and not a revolution. In other words, sexuality is taken out of the public realm where it's used to sell products or control you and put back in this long, covered up. And I said, I tried to explain to him that was a kind of real liberation, that you're liberated from this kind of annoying, presence all the time.
Could it be?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mikhail Welbeck wrote a book recently, and he talks about the Muslim culture in that respect, and that women actually in their burqas, that they protect themselves more in culturally speaking.
By choice.
If you look in America, right? Like most women put themselves up, spend a lot of time to go out in the culture to show the world how beautiful they are. But then when it's time to come home to turn themselves over to their husbands, they're too exhausted because they've been showing the world all day long how beautiful they are.
Yeah.
Whereas they say in the Muslim culture, they cover themselves and then they come home and they tear it off and they got jewels ready waiting for their husbands,
that's
right?
True. That's true.
And so they have a lot more intimacy and value on the sexual nature of the relationship between the husband and the wife, whereas most of the time the immodest dress is women going around trying to get the attention from men in this culture because it's intrinsically disordered in the way that they're dealing with their husbands at home.
I think you're exactly onto it. Because in a sense, we're not really talking about Muslim culture, we're talking about medieval culture. And this would be, they dressed the way they dressed in the Middle Ages. You remember nuns? Remember the way the old habits of the nuns? That was simply a form of dress in the Middle Ages. And so what you're seeing is a return to the traditional, because women never went out with their heads uncovered. They would never go outside. And in a sense, men never went out without their heads uncovered either, up till the time of John F. Kennedy.
But isn't it so that at the time of Wagner and in Eastern Germany in the mid-1800s, you had 150, 200 years of Protestant revolt, Lutheranism, and an advent of Calvinism, which had sort of an extreme sort of a rigorous modesty or ethnic kind of an approach to things, mirrored maybe by Jansenism in America, in the Irish and French. But the point is, at that time, you also had an extreme sort of religious combativeness between the southern states of Germany, which were strongly Catholic. And so you had internecine warfare within Germany itself. So you had all this stuff playing in, and I have no idea where I'm going with this.
We don't either. Sounds good to me, Jim.
My point being is that perhaps you had. I'm catching up to myself here. So the idea is that you have a sort of a you might say non-Catholic rigorous almost asceticism or Puritanism. Thank you. That is reacted against inappropriately and yet justifiably to a certain extent. Understandably, very good. Against that sort of almost inhumanity, you know what I mean? That Wagner represents, and that even insofar as I say that Nietzsche represents. And so I think what you're having at root is not so much a musical rebellion as much as a sort of justifiable kind of recoiling from this sort of this non-Catholic, you know, Puritanism that too is also seems to be siding with this economic rigor of capitalism that is horrifying in terms of the proletariat. And so there you have almost this kind of supportive element behind oligarchic.
Okay.
You know what I mean? See what I'm saying?
There are two causes of the Reformation: sex and greed. Sex mostly among the clergy, greed mostly among the aristocracy who wanted to steal church property. What you had in places like Munster, for example, the commune in Munster, was former Catholics, oftentimes former priests and nuns, in one sexual orgy. The head of Munster was Bokelzoon, who had 12 wives, free love, and when the wives displeased him, he chopped their heads off. This caused a reaction. In other words, when you have this type of sexual liberation, there is a reaction. Now, the reaction is coming at a time where there's no legitimate authority anymore. In other words, Elizabethan England had no authority. They were hijackers, they were thieves, and so why should we obey them? So they had to introduce the police state. This is the first police state, and Walsingham was the head of the CIA, and John Dee was involved in that. So what you have here is the lack of legitimate authority, the destruction of traditional culture, and now a police state regime imposed on that to keep order, which is then going to cause a reaction. So you have this pendulum swinging back and forth. And that's where Wagner comes in. People who thought the French Revolution was going to lead to heaven on earth realized that it led to capitalism and rule by the Jews and Jewish usury. And so the reaction was, one of the reactions was sexual liberation. This is, in a sense, the natural reaction to this. It's always wrong, but it's always natural. Because you're going to say, well, I don't care. I can still, and you had this in the 60s, a lot of this, you know, we're going to have free love because I don't want a corporate job or something.
Especially
like
if there's impurity in the true church. If the true church is not being a beacon, you know, to.
And that is always the case. There is always
That's a
impurity.
catalyst.
There's always impurity. Yes. Okay, John.
A question about folk music, but first of all, a throwaway line that I don't want you to be able to escape without giving one of the best repartees that I've ever heard. I'm a Muslim woman in Tehran, and you've talked about the situation in the United States, and so I say to you, well, Dr. Jones, is America then the great Satan?
The answer is yes.
What I heard from you was, why badmouth Satan?
Why is America the great Satan? How does Satan corrupt you?
He lies to you.
Does he use physical force? He leads you into sin. What do you think this culture is doing? It's nothing but, what do you think pornography is? What do you think all these things are? They are leading you into sin to enslave you. That's why America is the great Satan. Okay.
Then the question about folk music, and this is not a rhetorical question. I really appreciate an exploration of it. In 1913, Bela Bartok and Zoltan Kodaly started out on a trip around Hungary first and then much of Europe collecting folk music because they had the sense it was dead and the remnants of it better be captured before it simply disappeared. Now, I'm not defending their position or attacking it. I'm old enough, as you know, to be your father.
That's right.
So,
he doesn't look a day over 97.
and so I grew up in a house where almost everyone played musical instruments, and after supper, almost like in Joyce's accounts of Dublin, we sang. And people whom we knew came in and played other instruments. My father and mother played violin. We had a neighbor who played harmonica and so on.
Shows you how old this guy is.
Yeah.
He's a good man.
And by the way, when I taught at a little college in Lakeland in Wisconsin here, which made part of its livelihood by taking in Chicago blacks from the settlements, from Cabrini, Green, and so on, I was teaching the Joyce novel, the portrait of the artist as a young man, and in it, his family sits around the table after supper and sings. I had a black student from Cabrini come to me after class and say, they sat around and sang after supper. Were they mentally retarded? This is a black,
Yep.
from Chicago, who can't understand that this is what people did. So anyway, what happens, I added all this in because there was folk music in my youth and not much of the radio. There was a radio. But what happens to folk music once there is a radio? Were Kodai and what's his name correct that it's
Bartok.
dead? Yeah, Bartok dead.
Were they
Was it?
correct?
Pardon?
Yes, the answer is yes, because the radio destroys music. It destroys traditional music. And traditional music becomes incomprehensible compared to the radio. That was the big turning point. Yes, sir.
What is traditional music?
Folk music.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
where does it arise?
From the folk.
well, so what about
Nobody knows. There's no
Yeah,
author to
yeah,
any of these.
Okay, that's what I was.
So what about a family sharing their music on YouTube or something like that? Is this still?
YouTube is just a form of transmitting data. It doesn't really change the experience.
Well,
So if you're making music and you happen to put it on YouTube, well, that doesn't really matter. The point is, what is the point here? The point is, do we have the guts to sit in front of each other and sing?
Yeah.
well, so
Do we have the ability to say, okay, yeah, you prove that. You prove that.
What about your George Bush songs, for example, right? So say we start singing that as a family. Say I wasn't here, but I watched but I watched the video recording and then we sing it together. Is that still folk music? I guess if
It's folk music
influenced through-
because the tune is folk. You're talking about "Tell George Bush we won't fight in this war." Is that the
right,
one we're
yes,
talking
so
about?
the one you just sang.
That's a different. That's the Irving Crystal song.
Yeah.
There's a George Bush song that I did sing. It was an anti-war song.
Well, so say that you sang a song you sing with your family. I guess
And
the
passed
question
on.
is, to what? Sure, we can all sing songs with our family in isolation, but we're not isolationists either, right? So, what influence can we have on each other? Musically.
We have a great resource here. We have Georg Friedrich Handel sitting right there. It's exactly like him in the picture, and he can lead he leads choirs. He can form a group where you can sing together at a much higher level than I could do.
But you
Because
know,
he has-
Matt, you have this right in front of you. You don't even know it.
Right.
Where do you have it? In the Amish communities. They have singings
They do.
all the time.
They do.
I don't know.
And they have no radios, but you go over to their places sometimes when they have one of these singings. It's beautiful.
Is it really? Okay, I understand.
Let
I
me
understand.
try to explain something. There is a relationship between music and ethnic identity. So the more ethnic identity, the more music you sing together, the more ethnic identity you will have. The more ethnic identity you have, the more music you will do together. There's a direct relationship here, and that's all I'm trying to get started. So, to give you one example, I go to a group that's not dissimilar to this group here in Grand Haven, Michigan. And I go in there and I give a talk, and then there's a guy. They're Catholics, a lot of them homeschoolers, big family, 7, 8 kids. And one guy's a professional musician. And I said, why aren't you playing Irish music? There are thousands of tunes. You will never exhaust this repertoire. Okay? And you can play it on the tin whistle. A 4-year-old can play it on the tin whistle. You can have your entire family play it. And for once in my life, someone did what I said. And so this guy, now,
What was his name?
his name is Mike Drost. And
Don't look him up on YouTube.
Curry
I used to
Noonan,
live in Granite.
Curry Noonan is his brother. So now they have, every Saturday morning, there are 40 kids getting together playing simple Irish tunes. Like, it's amazing to see a 4-year-old
Yeah, but wait a minute.
being able to play a
Yeah,
tune.
wait. But remember whiskey in the jar, okay?
Yes.
Now look. There's a great Irish drinking song called "Whiskey in the Jar." Dum, ba, dum, ba, dum, bum, bum. And what do they talk about? Kilcarney, where the hell that is, and Kent, or all these things. And they're talking about stuff. And if I was Irish, if I was a full-blooded Irish, I would kind of like it because it has to do with my cultural heritage way back when in another land, halfway around the world. Okay, but what we're talking about here, and I think we talked about this a little bit, is that if I said, okay guys, let's sing. Let's sing, come on.
Can I
Let's
just
sing.
add?
What are we going to sing?
What
What are we going to sing? All right, what are we going to sing? What do we all know? What do we all know?
Metallica covered that song.
Okay, okay. Hallelujah. Yeah, exactly. A doggone church hymn. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what they get us moving. Yeah, that's what they get us moving. That's what they get us moving. That's for church.
All right, calm down.
Wake me up when it's over. Calm down. I'm talking about manly tunes.
Jim, Metallica covered that song.
I have the solution here. All right, ready?
Yep. Sing
I
it.
want everyone to sing now.
All right.
I've been a wild rover for many a year, and I've spent all my money on whiskey and beer, and now I've returned with gold and great store, and I never will play the wild rover no more. It's no, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. Will I play the wild rover? No, never, no more. I went to a tavern I used to frequent, and I told the landlady the money was spent. I asked her for custom, she said to me, nay, such custom as yours I can have any day. Oh, it's no, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. Shall I play the wild rover? No, never, no more. From out of my pockets I pulled sovereigns bright, and the landlady's eyes lit up with delight. She said, I have whiskey and wine of the best, and the words that were spoken were only in jest. And it's no, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. Will I play the wild rover? No, never, no more. I'll return to my family, confess what I've done, and I'll ask them to take back their prodigal son. And if they accept me as oft times before, then I never will play the wild rover no more. And it's no, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. Will I play the wild rover? No, never, no more.
So half of your Irish really likes that
Now
song.
that's a drinking song, okay?
Yeah,
It
but what
doesn't-
we have to
it
do is
doesn't
come
have
up
to
with
be-
our own.
But I mean, this is a song that It's a folk song. Everybody can sing it. You don't have to be a genius.
And the lyrics aren't amoral.
And the lyrics are they're nice lyrics. It's not sacred music. Sacred music is different. It's not appropriate for some, and just this type of music is not appropriate for a sacred.
Right.
So they're different.
So I get
Yes,
One
hold on.
practical suggestion. Not only am I 97 years old, but I've had more children than all of you put together.
That's right.
And one of the things I learned that way was one of my sons went to St. Gregory's, an academy in Pennsylvania near Scranton. One of the things I learned from there was what they learned. They began every class with a song. They know, he knows, and another son who went there just for a year, know all those songs. They sing them together. They sing them at home. Now, there's a lot of homeschooling here, I suspect, and a lot of input into other schools where you might go. Get your children to do that before every class, or try to get it into the school.
But you know, there's one thing I have to say, just real quickly, is that I had a son who went to the same school, all right?
Yeah.
And he would come home and he'd play these Irish drinking songs and things like this. And they always pertained, there was one in particular that talked about the black and tans. Come on, ye black and tans, da 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 da. And it's all about the Northern Ireland rebellion against the oppression of the Brits, you know, and it talked about all kind of things that really pertain to that particular historical eventuality. And all I'm saying is that as good as that was, all I'm saying is that if we all started singing that, I don't know how many full-blooded Irish are we have here.
full-blooded.
Full-blooded Irish. We got
Quit
two.
bragging.
Full-blooded.
Braggarts.
Full-blooded Irish. Now listen, hey. Now if I was now if I was in, let me say this: if I was in New England where I was raised, okay, if I was in Connecticut, and I said how many full-blooded Irish, about half of y'all would say whoop right away, and I'd say how many full-blooded Italian, whoop the other half, whoop, right there. And so the idea is that out here, it's like we don't have full-blooded Irish, okay? So if we all started singing this thing about black and tans, all I'm saying is that wouldn't it be nice if we started singing a song that was robust and we started to hit it and we started to sing about the hell with Hillary, you know, or something. There's something about where we live today, where we can all galvanize. But anyway,
So now we gotta write
just a
music.
thought.
Folk music.
Just a thought. Just a thought.
It's our own folk music.
How about, and this is what I hear, my best, and
but
they
we
sing
need
most
our
of
own.
all,
Yes.
the Parting Glass. You know that?
The driftless folk music.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a
saying,
young
somebody
guy.
needs to compose our
I'm
own.
a young guy, and I
I'll do it.
don't know the folk songs. And I know Tolkien. I understand Industrial Revolution, and it's bad, right? But my point is that radio's bad, right? And YouTube might be bad, but it could also. From my perspective, I think it would be good that I can hear these songs using technology, maybe, and learn them and start singing them as a family.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. And I know that being dependent on the machine might be bad, but in today I have no culture because I'm American,
Right.
and I'm German and Irish, and I don't have the connection.
Great. You're biracial too.
Yes, I'm biracial. I admit it.
But the point I wanted to make a point here. YouTube and the computer are now really good for learning songs.
Okay.
So you hear,
Well, that's I guess that's what I was saying.
you hear something like you can type it in, you can listen to someone's rendition on YouTube, then you can type in, you can find the chords and the music. It's
Right.
very simple to learn music.
Well, yeah, and to my point, I grew up through MTV, right? And you had no choice, right? You had to use the oppression of the culture, right?
But
But
now you
nowadays
have a
we're
choice.
liberated, through the internet. I feel like through technology we're liberated, where we can learn our cultural songs. We can learn the things.
But we almost need new stuff. We
need
Right.
new
stuff.
Yes, did you want to say something?
You have to form a singing culture first, and then you can begin to riff off of that, basically,
New
and,
things grow out of the old.
reform.
Right.
First
a
we gotta
new
start singing.
vocabulary. But let's start
You know,
singing
row, row, your boat.
first.
Yeah, you're right.
I nominate David
To a certain
We
extent,
always complain.
the
We always
music-
complain in the colloquium that we never get anywhere, right? I mean, we always
Well,
complain,
we
right,
should
Jim?
start with a song.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So Jim always complains to me, we never get anywhere, we never do anything. I thought, well, a little resolution for this men's group, and maybe this other group might have done the same thing, is
Next time you're
good
president.
music's hard to find right now, right? That's a big problem, and it takes work, it takes effort, right? You had to rediscover folk music, right? Versus this other stuff's all in your ears all the time. It's always pumped in, you know. You listen to classic rock all day at work, all day long. I would just ask, as some sort of a resolution, I'm not trying to end the discussion, but as a resolution for the colloquium, I'd ask guys to let's send in to the group email address good music that you found out there, that you can listen to, and let's start there.
That we can sing together.
Well, listen.
We can sing
I-
together.
well,
Yeah.
I would raise one thing is that on the one hand, David said, you know, you almost need a singing culture first, and I would argue against that.
Let's start
I would
here.
say that no. First and foremost, what leads the singing is the meaning and the robustness behind it. You have to have some sort of a cause.
But
This is what the colloquium is,
So,
right?
so
We
what
got
we
a
need,
cause.
so what
Sing.
we need
You
is,
got the cause.
okay, what we need, now what we need,
We have a question. Stop. We have a question.
what we need is
We have a-
lyrics.
we have a
when we started
question.
singing
Yes.
the Regina Caeli, you started.
We have a question
One of the
from
good
someone who
things.
actually knows something about music.
Two different topics. One is like a huge topic. What's your take on Christian rock? Okay, sorry. And the other one is about contemporary Christian music in the mass.
Okay.
Two questions.
Okay.
Real short answers.
Okay, I was invited to speak at Taylor University on Dionysian music. So it's an evangelical university. I walk down there, walk into the auditorium, and there's a drum set on the stage. So I thought, I'm in trouble here. Because the point of my talk was you can't worship Christ with Dionysian music. And what I had in the back of my mind was Pius X's motu proprio on sacred music and his endorsement of Palestrina. So I got up there and I said, this is what Christian rock is like. Chastity. There's kind of cognitive dissonance.
How'd that go?
So that's cognitive dissonance. Okay, it doesn't work. Okay. They were ready to lynch me. They were absolutely ready. I've never had as hostile a response because they were all devotees. They were all devotees of Martin Luther, and they said, well, Martin Luther used drinking songs to worship God. And I said, well, I'm not a fan of Martin Luther. What do you want me to say about Martin Luther? You know, he couldn't control his passions. That's what I'm going to say. So it just, they were totally committed to what you would call Christian rock, which I consider an oxymoron. Because you can't worship Christ with Dionysian music. And the classic example I've already talked about is Palestrina. If you listen to Palestrina, you don't want to go, you don't want to do that. Because this part remains immobile and it raises the mind and heart to God. So the modern equivalent is I'm at Steubenville University. I don't want to offend anybody. I once got into trouble by comparing George Bush to Darth Vader. So I had to issue an apology, and I said, if Darth Vader was offended by this, I apologize. Anyway, I'm at Mass at Steubenville, and I'm behind this lady, and this lady, I'll turn around, and the lady, we're singing something. She's got her hands up this, and she's going like this. This is not sacred music. I don't care what you call it. The people.
It's sacral music.
This sacroiliac. But the people, you would talk to this lady would be mortally offended because the people at Steubenville feel that they're more Catholic than the Pope, and yet they're engaging in Dionysian music. This doesn't work. You don't move this part of your body when you're doing sacred music.
So can you talk about the differentiation between sacred music and folk music?
Well, okay, so yeah, and Christian rock, right, is outside of worship. It might be folk, we might call it folk Christian rock, right?
Yeah,
It's
so
outside
this is
of
the
worship.
question. You said the
We're not
Catholic
singing in the
identity
damn
is
choir.
ethnic, right?
We're not coming here and singing in the choir.
Thank you.
And the folk music is
And you threw everything
question
Irish
is
out.
what
We
is
have to
Catholic
write
folk
the
music?
song before we can sing it.
Yeah, I think that.
That's a good question. And what I played
It's
to
not
you,
Irish.
what I
played
played,
Catholic over years.
what I played to you tonight is my understanding of it's Catholic music. That's my sense of what Catholic
But he's
music
Catholic
is.
and he's not Irish. He doesn't
Okay,
identify with
okay,
Irish.
all right.
So what's Catholic?
What I played for you, the first one was an Irish tune. There's another tune I could play for you. I don't want to overburden you with
What
this.
about music of the mass?
That's sacred music. I'm not even going to talk about that. That's completely off to the
If
side.
sacred is
All we're
here.
talking about is
No drum sets.
all we're talking about is all we're talking about is folk music. Okay, so I want to tell you a story. It's about our experience in South Bend. I don't know whether you went through this in the state of Wisconsin, but in South Bend, Indiana, the biggest battle since the American Civil War was whether to go on daylight savings time or not. And so it divided the entire country. It was like this fratricidal, yes and no. So it wasn't the first time it happened. There was, in the 1970s, there was a woman who got on a radio talk show, and she said, it's not a good idea to go on daylight savings time. And the reason why is because her lawn was already brown. And if it got one more hour a day of sun, it would kill the grass completely.